It's time for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life in France with our very own Florence Villeminot.
Hi, Jeannie.
Hi, Flo. Now, France is gearing up for the 2017 presidential election, but rarely has there been so much uncertainty surrounding who could be the next person in the Elysée presidential palace. But there are some pretty clear rules about getting there, and that's what you're going to talk to us about today.
That's right. This episode of French Connections is going to be a little bit of a civic studies lesson here in France. So every 5 years, French people elect their president. The president is elected by direct universal suffrage. So the president is directly elected by voters. It's not like in the States where you have an electoral college vote system. Now, voting is not compulsory here in France, and it's actually quite easy. Let's take a look at just who can vote in France. Well, you have to be a French citizen. You have to be a legal adult, so 18 years and older. You also have to not be banned from voting for legal reasons. And finally, you have to be registered to vote on an electoral list.
Now, people from outside of France tend to be surprised by the number of candidates that actually run in these presidential elections. In 2012, there were 10 candidates, which is nothing compared to 2002 when there were 16.
That's right. To some people from the outside, it seems like anybody can run for president here in France. There are some boxes you have to check. You have to be a French citizen, but unlike in the States, you don't have to be born in France. You just have to be a French citizen. You also have to be a registered voter. You also have to show moral dignity. Now, there's no official definition for what that means, but it's a requirement of the French president. And then finally, to stand for an election, you have to gather 500 signatures of support from elected representatives across France.
Now, the multitude of candidates stems from another particularity of the French electoral system. It's in 2 rounds.
That's right, and that's true for most elections, and also true for the presidential election. So elections happen in 2 rounds that always take place on Sundays. Now, in the first round, and the first round is scheduled for the 23rd of April this year, the first round is open to any candidate that fills those requirements we were talking about. Now, if there's no candidate that reaches an absolute majority in that first round, and so far it's never happened, then there's a second round that's held 2 weeks later. This time it's scheduled for May 7th. Now, whoever gets the absolute majority in the second round, so 50% of the vote plus 1 vote, well, they're the next president of France.
Now, this 2-round system is seen as being a safeguard of French democracy, if you like, sort of a safety net that can keep populists from sweeping to power in the second round.
That's right, and there's a really interesting expression in France. Basically, they say that in the first round, you vote with your heart. You vote for the candidate you really believe in, or you vote to make a statement. But in round 2, you vote with your head. Essentially, you vote for the candidate that you find the most reasonable. But this 2-round system means that it's really tricky to predict just who's going to win the election.
It's really hard to predict who's going to win. People vote for one person in the first round and someone else in the second. It's not logical.
And there's also a certain amount of strategy in these 2 rounds because often the people who are eliminated in the first round, those candidates tell their backers who to vote for in round 2.
That's right, and that leads us to a very important expression in France. It's our word du jour. It's the pacte républicain. Now, this is a deal, a traditional deal that's existed between the left and the right. It's a tacit agreement that when push comes to shove, they join forces for the good of the country, for instance, to get the country out of a crisis. Now, in recent history, this pacte républicain has been used to block the far-right National Front.
I remember that because I was here for that. It was in 2002, I think.
That's right. Now, that was the presidential election of 2002. It was a really surprising election. Against all odds, the far-right candidate Jean-Marie Le Pen made it to round 2 by beating the socialist candidate Lionel Jospin. So he made it to round 2 against the conservative candidate Jacques Chirac. Now, to many voters, particularly voters on the left, this was a real slap in the face. And in round 2, left-wing voters followed this pacte républicain and massively voted for Jacques Chirac. He won round 2 with over 82% of the vote. But what's interesting is that date, the date of round 1, the 21st of April 2002, has really gone down in French history. For a lot of people, it's a dark day in French history that should never be repeated. Let's actually listen to some voters at the time.
Seront Jacques Chirac et Jean-Marie Le Pen.
Make Le Pen embodies hate. It's not possible. That's not France.
I'm going to vote in round 2, but with a heavy heart. You know, I'm 57. I've never voted for the right, but I'm going to because I don't have a choice.
Now, the election of 2002 is on everyone's minds these days because Jean-Marie Le Pen's daughter, Marine Le Pen, currently the leader of the far-right National Front, could very well make it to round 2 of the upcoming presidential election. And the key question is, if that happens, will the Pacte Républicain hold again? Well, it's unclear.
All right, that's all for voting strategy. How does the vote itself actually happen on Election Day?
Well, like most democratic elections, voting is secret here in France, and it's usually done using paper and manual counting. So what you do is you show up at your polling station with your ID card, and on this table you can see here, well, there are all these little pre-printed bulletins with the names of the various candidates. So you take one of these papers, and you take a little envelope, and you take them into a little booth with a curtain, you can see it happening right here, called an isoloir. It's a secret booth where you cast your ballot. Now, for your ballot to count, you have to put one name in the envelope. If you put anything more than that or anything less than that, well, your vote doesn't count. So when you get out of the little isoloir here, you go and you slip your little envelope into the ballot box, and traditionally, an official says very loudly a ceremonial formula. Let's take a listen.
À voter.
À voter. À voter. À voter. À voter.
À voter, merci beaucoup.
À voter, it's official, you've cast your ballot, you've accomplished your civic duty, and now the stressful waiting game begins.
Florence Villeminot, thank you so much for that look at how the French voting system works. If you have any other questions about France in general, you can always tweet Flo at Flo Villeminot to ask her anything you might want to know about the intricacies of life in France.